Welcome to today's Explainer. Now, as a medical researcher, I spend a huge chunk of my life looking through microscopes, crunching data, and running clinical trials to try and figure out human health. But today, I'm stepping out of the lab to share something with you that is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating physiological mysteries we've ever encountered. You see, sometimes the most profound medical discoveries aren't actually found in a brand new chemical compound, they're found right inside the human mind. So we're going to dive right into this because we are exploring how your brain can literally convince your body that a completely fake treatment is the real deal and actually trigger measurable healing.
To really wrap our heads around this, I want to take you back to a totally baffling study from 1996. Just picture this. You're one of 56 volunteers walking into our lab. The researchers tell you, hey, we're testing this incredibly powerful new painkiller called trevaricane. The setup is pretty simple, if not a little intimidating. We rub this new trevaricane lotion onto one of your index fingers, and we leave the other index finger totally alone. Then, to test how well the drug works, both of your index fingers are squeezed in these painful mechanical clamps.
Now, you can probably guess what we were expecting to see, and honestly, the data was night and day. When we looked at the results between the two fingers, the contrast was absolutely undeniable. The subjects overwhelmingly told us that the finger treated with the trevaricane hurt significantly less in those painful clamps compared to the untreated finger. So on paper, this drug looked like a massive clinical success. It was doing exactly what a painkiller is supposed to do.
But here's the massive twist. Trevaricane? It wasn't a real drug at all. We completely made it up. It was literally just a fake concoction with absolutely zero pain-easing properties. None. Zip. So as researchers, we're sitting there staring at this data, just scratching our heads, thinking, what on earth made these 56 students so absolutely certain that this dummy drug had worked? How did a fake lotion successfully alter a person's very real perception of physical pain?
Well, the answer lies in what we call the placebo effect. And fun fact, the word placebo is actually Latin for I shall please. Historically speaking, doctors have known about this since the 1700s. Back in those days, when effective medicines basically didn't exist, or if a doctor thought a patient was just imagining their illness, they relied on fake drugs simply to placate them. They'd hand out sugar pills, give water-filled injections, or even perform entirely sham surgeries just to mimic a real treatment. And the crazy part, these fake interventions often actually made people feel better.
Eventually, the medical community caught on that this historical trick actually had a huge clinical upside. By the time we hit the 1950s, researchers had adopted placebos as a mandatory standard tool for running clinical trials. But, our methodology has had to evolve quite a bit since then. Today, we have very strict ethical guidelines. If someone comes in with a serious ailment, it's just not ethical to leave them completely untreated just to test a new drug. So in modern trials, we often use placebos to fine-tune our research, using them as active comparators against older, existing drugs, rather than just giving a sick person nothing at all.
Let's look at the mechanics of those classic 1950s-style clinical trials, because they are basically the bedrock of medical research. To evaluate a new drug, we split the patients. Group A gets the actual, newly synthesized pill. Group B gets the dummy pill, the placebo, and it looks, smells, and tastes exactly like the real thing. We deliberately blind the patients so they have no clue if they're getting the real deal or a total dud. For a long time, we thought this was the perfect, foolproof way to prevent biased results. If Group A did way better than Group B, boom, the drug worked.
But here is where we hit a really big scientific roadblock. What happens if Group A and Group B have the exact same reaction? What if everyone improves? For decades, the scientific community just automatically assumed that if the placebo group improved just as much as the group taking the real medication, well, the real drug was a total failure, completely useless. But as we've started digging deeper into the data, we really had to ask ourselves, does a placebo effect actually mean a drug failed, or are we just completely misinterpreting what the body is doing?
So here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. Modern experts have realized that reacting to a placebo doesn't mean a drug failed. It actually proves that an entirely separate, non-pharmacological mechanism is at play. We are totally shifting the narrative away from simple psychology and moving straight into hardcore neuroscience. Because this isn't just about having a good attitude or the power of positive thinking. Not at all. As researchers, we are measuring actual complex neurobiological reactions in the lab. The connection between the brain and the body is physically strengthening.
When you expect to recover, your brain doesn't just sit back and relax, it actively goes to work. We can track highly specific, strictly measurable physiological changes triggered by nothing but placebos. We're talking concrete drops in blood pressure and clear alterations in heart rate. We can literally measure the brain releasing feel-good neurotransmitters and pain-reducing chemicals, like endorphins and dopamine. We even see a measurable drop in stress hormones like adrenaline, which can actually slow down the harmful effects of certain ailments. The placebo is literally a chemical pathway for the brain to tell the body what it needs to do to feel better.
To figure out exactly where all this magic is happening, we have to look deep inside the human brain. Specifically, researchers have zeroed in on a region called the middle frontal gyrus. This area is a huge deal. It makes up about a third of your entire frontal lobe. When we map out the brain neurologically, this specific region is heavily linked to how we process our moods, our emotional reactions, and our self-awareness. It basically acts as a central command center for how we perceive our own physical well-being.
And the best part is we have the imaging to back this all up. There was this really amazing study published in PLOS Biology where researchers took patients dealing with the chronic pain of knee osteoarthritis and they put them into functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, scanners. After giving everyone a placebo, they ran the brain scans again. The data was crystal clear. The patients who felt the most pain relief from the fake treatment had significantly greater activity precisely in that middle frontal gyrus. We could literally watch the placebo effect lighting up on the monitor.
But, it's not solely about releasing brain power. As researchers, we have to account for environmental variables too. We call this the ritual of treatment. Think about everything that happens when you join a clinical trial. First, you're going to a specialized clinic at very specific, scheduled times. Second, you're being examined by serious medical professionals wearing crisp white coats. Third, you're receiving exotic-looking pills or going through these strange high-tech procedures. Just the sheer ritual of feeling attended to, of being cared for by experts, has a profoundly measurable impact on how your body perceives its own symptoms.
Which brings us to a really counterintuitive question. For the longest time, the traditional medical assumption was that placebos only work if the patient is successfully tricked, right? Like, the patient absolutely must believe it's a real drug. But what happens if we take away the deception entirely? What happens if you, the patient, know for 100% absolute fact that the pill you're swallowing is a totally fake, inactive placebo? Surely the effect would just vanish, right?
Well, to test this exact thing, we look at a really unique study published in Science Translational Medicine that focused on migraine pain medication. The researchers took migraine sufferers and split them into 3 groups. Group 1 got a real, proven migraine drug labeled with its actual name. Group 2 got absolutely nothing. But Group 3, they got a dummy pill explicitly labeled with the word placebo. They were told straight to their faces, no trickery whatsoever, this is a completely fake pill.
And the results of this brilliantly illustrate just how powerful our internal systems really are. When the data came back, that open-label placebo, the one the patients knew was a fake, was 50% as effective as the real drug at reducing migraine pain. Just let that sink in for a second. 50%. Researchers concluded that the simple physical ritualistic action of taking a pill is enough to stimulate the brain. You associate the act of taking medicine with healing and your brain just kicks into gear, even without a single active chemical ingredient.
So what does this mean for us? How can you harness this in your own life without popping a fake pill? Well, simply engaging in the ritual of healthy living acts as its own powerful placebo. When you practice self-help methods like eating right, getting daily exercise, doing yoga, spending really quality social time with friends, or meditating, these aren't just good habits. When you combine them with intentional attention and emotional support, they provide the exact key ingredients of the placebo effect. They signal to your brain that you are caring for yourself, which helps you feel more comfortable in the world and physically aids in your healing.
Now, as a medical professional, I definitely need to ground this science in reality for a minute. We have to be crystal clear about the limitations here. Placebos are not magical cures for structural or systemic diseases. They are not going to shrink a tumor, they can't lower your cholesterol, and they absolutely cannot cure an underlying illness. However, what they absolutely can do is work on symptoms modulated by the brain. They are incredibly effective at tweaking pain perception, easing stress-related insomnia, and remarkably, they can reduce cancer treatment side effects like fatigue and nausea. They make you feel better, even if they aren't curing the root cause.
And this brings us to what we call the researcher's dilemma. On one hand, placebos are completely fascinating, but on the other hand, they are a massive, frustrating hurdle for us. They cloud our clinical trial results, which makes it incredibly tough to prove if a new drug is actually doing its job. Plus, we obviously can't just prescribe placebos to everyone. If a patient relies on a fake treatment, they risk missing out on proven, life-saving therapies. And we have to remember, the positive effects of a placebo often fade over time. They just aren't a permanent biological fix.
But at the end of the day, despite all our highly advanced microscopes, our fMRI machines, and centuries of rigorous clinical trials, the human body remains full of strange, beautiful, and enduring mysteries. The placebo effect proves without a doubt that we are capable of synthesizing our own relief, triggered by nothing more than the expectation of care and the rituals of medicine. It really makes you wonder, as we constantly investigate the world around us searching for new chemical cures, what other undiscovered marvels might we contain? Because perhaps one of the most fascinating subjects in all of medical science is sitting right there, right behind our very own eyes. Thanks so much for joining me on today's Explainer, and I'll catch you next time.